the Via Stoica podcast with Brendan and Benny, powered by viastoica.com, your home for coaching, workshops, quotes, and Stoic content that inspires. Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast. I'm your host, Benny, and today we have an amazing guest. We have Kortney Yasenka. I'll ask about your background as well and where the names come from. There's a lot of diverse interest topics here in this conversation today, which I'm looking forward to diving into deeper. But first of all, just to introduce Kortney a little bit, she's a licensed clinical mental health counselor with over 20 years of experience. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow, that's amazing. I already have a bunch of questions on that. And you're also a certified trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapist with a master's degree from Northeastern University. And again, this has Stoicism written all over it, and I can't wait for this conversation. Maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit, more yourself, and we can dive right into it. Because again, so many questions pop up about your background and where you come from, but maybe you want to give us a little bit of details of who you are to the listeners and what you do.
Sure. So I'm, like you said, a licensed mental health counselor, so a therapist. I have a private practice now. I've worked in community mental health settings where I did some home visits. I worked in a school setting, a family resource setting, and then recently, not so recently now, I have a private practice. I'm also a life coach for student athletes and a Stoic consultant for school districts and businesses. And that's kind of a new endeavor, but it's going really, really well, which is kind of one of my favorite things to do these days. I'm also an author of 3 books, 2 on Stoicism, 1 on Swedish Lagom. And we have a couple more Stoic quote books coming out. And I also do continuing education courses for Hatherley Behavioral Health. So writing courses for other clinicians so they can get their continuing ed courses done.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And I didn't know about the school part and integrating Stoicism there. I used to be a teacher as well. I worked in education. I've loved, let me just start right there, because that's something new, right? That's something that you just started doing. And how does that work? Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
So recently I did a day-long retreat. So it was about 6 to 8 hours of talking about what Stoicism is and how you can cultivate it in a school setting. So it was with school administration. And we went over, they actually read Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. So they had some background of Stoicism, which was nice. And then we went into different ways they could embrace the Stoic mindset. So they have more, empathetic conversations with people and understanding, making better decisions, being better leaders, and how to bring that mindset to their different like classrooms or schools. And it was really interactive, and they did different, scenarios. And it was really, really interesting to see their take on Stoicism and how to apply it, because it's, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and Stoicism has become so popular these days, but really like everything stems from Stoicism. So I had like friends and family read some other books, or they were listening to something and they're like, oh, it told us to just like let go of certain things or focus on that. And I'm like, guys, that's Stoicism. And they're like, oh. I'm like, everything stems from Stoicism. And if everybody could just, live that way, I think it would be such a better world and everybody would have a better mindset. But I don't think people realize how prevalent Stoicism is in every setting. And I think there are a ton of misconceptions about Stoicism. So I love that you're doing your podcast and kind of bringing more awareness to Stoicism and how it could be used. People think it's like, oh, just this ancient way of thinking, but how, we can use it in our everyday life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how did the students react to it? Because was this something, did some of them know what it was, or did they, was it new for them, and how did they react to the philosophy?
So it wasn't for students yet. I would love to do it for students. It was for the administrators, so like the principals, superintendent, assistant superintendent. But it was interesting because we talked obviously a lot about, you can only focus on what is within your control. You can't, worry too much about things outside of your control. So we did different scenarios of, is this in your control? Is it not? I think what was interesting for me, people realized like, oh yeah, I have to let go of things that aren't within my control. But they weren't really accurately identifying what was in their control. So we had one teacher say, I can control student behavior. And it was like, you can put things in place, but ultimately you can't control another person's behavior. But it was like, it was eye opening because I was like, oh, they understand the concept of it, but not how it really applies to them. So again, it's just more, education on their part to realize like, yes, you can do certain things to hope that a student, behaves or acts this way, but ultimately you have no control over what they do.
I experienced that when I was teaching in Dubai. That was like I've learned how to see what was in my control and what wasn't. Oh, that's really interesting. I like that, and especially the fact that you highlight that they know kind of the techniques or the strategies, but not really how to implement it. I think that that's really crucial, right? That's where it usually tends to break down. How did it come across on your path, like for you personally? Where did Stoicism come? Where did you find Stoicism, or did you know it before? And when did you start to really dive into it?
I think Stoicism kind of found me. I think growing up, being Swedish and English and having that misconception of what Stoic meant, everybody was like, oh, you're so Stoic. Like, you don't show a lot of emotion. And in my head, I was like, I'm pretty emotional. Like, I have a lot of emotion. I'm usually in a decent mood. But just because I'm not so expressive with it doesn't mean I don't, feel it. And then my co-author, who had written other books, said, I'm doing this Stoicism book of quotes. And I had been a contributing author for another one of his books. And it talked about basically like cognitive behavioral therapy and changing your mindset. So he liked that part. And he said, I want you to write the intros of how like Stoicism, the whole Stoic mindset can be used in everyday life. So when I was doing more research in that, I was like, oh, yeah, like Stoicism, cognitive behavioral therapy stemmed from Stoicism, but we never learned that, in college or grad school. So really I feel like it kind of found me. And now I feel like I've become even more stoic, which is a good thing. And I, like ramble off quotes to family and everything because it's like every aspect of your life, and they get annoyed a little bit. They're like, oh, I know it's stoicism. I was like, but it is like, and that's what should kind of guide you. So I feel like it really did find me. I think I was always a stoic, but I didn't realize it until probably a few years ago.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar, especially with the ones where where you ramble off the quotes. My sister asked me to make like raise my finger, Seneca said, and then it's like okay, here we go. But that's interesting, and as you mentioned, like it made you more stoic, right? I think that that's something I wanted to dive into that a little bit deeper because that's a really important part where the misconceptions with stoicism, about not being emotional, but internally you do feel the emotions. I've been called a robot sometimes, but I feel emotions, it's just that I try to, when I act, not really use those emotions and later on try to process it when it's due time. But how did that step made you, how did that influence your life? And in what way did it help you?
I think I always had the like positive and optimistic mindset. And again, it's, with positive thinking and positive psychology, people think like, oh, you just have to be happy with everything. And it's like, no, you're not happy with everything. You're accepting it how it is. And then you're trying to make, the best of it. So I think I had that. But then learning more about Stoicism, it's, the decisions you make and your behaviors. I really go back to now, like, okay, the virtues. And if you're helping somebody else decide something, it's like, okay, well, are you using wisdom? Is it just? Are you, how are you making these decisions? Because then yourself, like, I'm okay with this decision, regardless of what happens. I know I made the decision I wanted to make based on, the virtues, that you live by. And I know it sounds kind of weird sometimes, but I think it's a really good guiding like force just to help like, okay, yeah, this is how I want to like live and this is what I want to do. And I'm, that like content, like peaceful feeling. I know I did, I focused on what I could control. I did the best I can. And, that's all I can do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I loved what you said about, because I'm also an optimist, right? A realistic person, but that doesn't mean that I'm happy all the time. I love how you said it is to make the best of it, right? And I think that that's the true optimistic attitude is like, okay, things don't always happen the way I want, but let me just try to make the best of it or let me find a solution. And you said that this is how you help people, right? In your counseling and your therapy. And how did this like more deeper dive into stoicism affect you on that aspect, on the professional front? Did it have an impact there?
Yes. So sometimes my clients now will be like, I can't be as stoic as you want me to be. And I was like, well, it's not what I, want. And it is more, it's easier said than done. But it's just, I always go back to, you got to focus on what you can control. Like, don't let your emotions control you. And it's, like we say, it's not feeling them. It's just not allowing them to, control yourself. But when I realized when I was writing this book and my other book, like cognitive behavioral therapy and kind of how to live a better overall well-being, that the way I would encourage clients to live was the Stoic way and the Swedish way of like Lagom. And I was like, oh, this is, how I can, bring it to my practice, because it's almost very just like very straightforward. And it's like, okay, if everybody, had this mindset, it's going to be easier for you to make decisions. It's going to make you feel more in control, which is going to decrease, your anxiety and depression. You're going to find that, purpose in life and the meaning and the balance in life. And it can all be done with these philosophies.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned Lagom there, right? It's a Swedish philosophy, and I definitely want to dive and we might jump around a little bit between the two concepts, but I think, since you mentioned it, I think it is a right moment to kind of introduce that, because I'm sure that not a lot of listeners here know about the philosophy, but as I was reading up a little bit about it, it sounds really fascinating. I'm definitely going to dive into it, and you have a book about it as well, right? Lagom, is it the just be enough, right? But yeah, tell us a little bit more about that, because I love the concept about enough and knowing what that means for us. But I'm not sure if that really fits in. But if you can give us a brief outline of Lagom.
Sure. So it's called Swedish Lagom, Finding Joy in Just Enough. And I actually wrote it with my Swedish mom. And come to find out, Lagom and Swedes, have a lot of similarities with Stoicism. And it's the philosophy of, finding joy in the little things in life and having that balance. So it's like a work-life balance, like a social time, a personal time. It's all about that balance. And there's certain things that we highlight in the book that you can do to kind of live that Lagom lifestyle. And again, a lot of similarities between Stoicism, it's spending time in nature. It's connecting, I call it togetherness time. It's connecting with friends and family. It's also finding that balance of alone time and being okay with that. There's different aspects of, cleanliness. Swedish people have this thing called Swedish death cleaning. And again, the Stoics and embracing death, but not in a morbid way, but in a, this is what happens, how do we, prepare for it, and how do we make our life better now, because we know it's, going to happen. We talk about fika, which is basically like a coffee break, but it's really a time that you can reconnect with others during the day or yourself, and businesses in Sweden take it. It's nice, kind of like a reset to find that balance. But then it also has this concept of, sometimes it is what it is. And the beginning of the book talks about how Sweden and a lot of the Nordic countries are always rated like the happiest countries in the world. But when you think of Swedish people, you don't always think of them laughing all the time or being really loud and like, smiling. It's more of that content happiness. And actually, I think a week ago, I was listening to your podcast about joy and contentment, and how that's what I would consider too, like true happiness. We're being content, and it's not always wishing for more or having more. It's making the best of what you have. Not that you can't wish for more. Everybody's enough is different, but it's really finding the joy in the little things in life and focusing on that, because those are the things that you have control over. Right? It's not like once I do this, I'll be happy, or once I do that, I'll feel content. It's a way of life. It's not really that like destination. So there are a lot of similarities between Swedish Lagom and the Stoic, philosophy.
That's amazing about the joy, right? Because I feel that is, as you explain it, I feel like I should have been, I could have been born in Sweden as well. I'm quite close, here in the Netherlands. I've been to Stockholm, which is beautiful, and I love to go more to Sweden, up into the north as well. But I love that concept of joy, but also about content, right? And joy is one of the good, the good emotions that the Stoics promote. Eupatheia and contentness is, for me, I always say, like, it's difficult enough to be content. Just try that first, and then see, what happiness actually means to you. And when you help people in your clinics, right? When you help your clients, how do you help them find that enough? And because that for me is always a difficult concept that people struggle with. Like, what is my enough? How do you help people find that enough and help them define it for themselves?
And I think it can be tough because depending on, your background and your culture, it is different. And when I wrote the Swedish book, I met with one of my Swedish friends, and we were talking about Lagom and how to incorporate things like that into your life. And there's at the end of each chapter, there's um, like a sh- like a checklist of like how you can incorporate this into your life, like do more things outside, or how to create like a cozy atmosphere, like buy these things. And she told me, it was funny, she's like, that's the American in you, where it's like, okay, this is what I have to do to feel this way. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it shouldn't have to be like this is everything that you need to feel this way. You just feel it. So everybody's a little bit different, but with my clients, I try to get them to see like, okay, what's like the end goal? Like, what do you really want? And then we kind of talk about how do we get there? And then again, it always goes back to what's in your control. Because if you're worried about what other people think or what you're going to get from other people, you're never really going to be happy or content, because that could all change. What you do almost doesn't matter. But if you can be happy with yourself, find that purpose within you and realize, okay, this is what's making me, like, I'm doing it for myself. Sometimes I say being selfish isn't always a bad thing. I mean, we still have to have a sense of community and, take care of others, but what you want and the joy you find in things. So it's kind of looking at like, what's that end goal? What does that happiness look like for you? And what are certain things we can do, day to day to get there? And it can change too. It's kind of like your priorities in life, right? And like your purpose. So there might be a phase of your life where this is my priority, this is my purpose, but then it can also change, as your, life situation and living situation changes too. But it's really trying to find, or give them a sense of, I have control over this. It's right. Is it Marcus Aurelius? The happiness of our life depends on the quality of our thoughts. I say that one a lot because it's true, and you have control over that. It's not easy, but you do have control over it. And I like to get clients to see that they have more control over their happiness than they think they do. Again, not saying that bad things don't happen and that things won't be hard, but they get to choose how to react to those situations and the life that they want to create.
Yeah, and do you find that clients struggle with that, accepting that concept that, as you said, the quality of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, that the quote from Marcus that you mentioned, is that do you think that it's difficult for them to accept because it is difficult and because they can't see themselves doing it, or where do you think that friction lies?
I think it can be difficult because, like I said, it's not just an easy fix. Like, oh, I'm just going to think about it differently one day and feel better. So I tell clients, to create different pathways in your brain, right? Instead of having like those automatic negative thoughts, if we want more optimistic thoughts, we have to change our way of thinking. And I tell them, you might not believe it at first. You probably won't. But if you say it to yourself, if you say it out loud, then that thought will become your automatic thought. But sometimes people feel more like, well, this happened to me, so I have to feel this way. And they don't want to feel like they have a lot of control over things, because sometimes that can be scary, because it's like, okay, well, what if I decide to change how I think and it doesn't, change how I feel? I mean, it will, but I think that's their fear. And sometimes I have conversations with clients where your outlook is different than the outcome. And they have a hard time with that because it's like, well, no, I want the outcome to change. It's like, okay, but we can't always do that. But how you view it will change how you feel about it. And again, it's just that acceptance of, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm so happy that this happened or everything is great. It's just, okay, what can how do I see this as a learning opportunity, or how can I grow from this? And we do a lot of self-reflection too, of like, okay, what can I take from this? My Swedish grandmother used to always say, it is what it is. And not in a like depressing kind of way, but just, this is the situation. So what are we going to do about it? But I think it does take clients a long time to change that way, of thinking.
Yeah, it's like they're in that comfort zone, right? This is what they're used to, and this is also an interesting book by Margaret Graver, Stoicism and Emotion, where she says like, okay, you have this emotion, and you've already kind of given yourself permission to feel a certain way connected to that emotion, and that's that kind of the pathways that you want to break through, right? And um, But it's also interesting, like you, because your mother is Swedish, right, and your father is American, right? If that's correct.
Yeah, so they were both born in America. So, but my
Okay.
mom's 100% Swedish, and my dad is English and Slovak.
Ah, okay. Oh, and that's also your last name, no? Yasenka is from the Slavic language, right? It sounded like that. Okay. And do you, with the concept of enough, right? Because you mentioned like you know your friend said like, oh, that's the American in you, which I liked. You know that was like an eye opener for you. It's like, oh wait, you know, is this really just American? How do you see the difference between your parents with the different backgrounds and that concept of enough?
Well, I think growing up, and this is in the Swedish Lagom book too, and again, like with Stoicism, it's you're not trying to like outdo everybody, right? So it's like you're doing what's best for you. And the Swedes have this concept of it's called Jantelagen, where it's like nobody's better than anybody else. And so instead of trying to like one up people all the time, the way we grew up, and my dad started different nonprofits and charities, and we were always pretty involved in the community. It's, how do we make it better, for everyone else? But it wasn't like they never had a conversation with us about that. It was just something that we did. And I think that's kind of the Swedish in my mom too, where it's like, we just, we're all part of, one world, and how are we going to, all function together? And I think I was listening to Stoic Mindset by your Olympic speed skater. I don't know if you've read
Mark
that one.
Titert.
Yes. And he was talking about, I think it was in his book. You guys also have a word for it's like it means like neighborly, basically, where like you're kind of like looking out for each other. I forget the Dutch word of it though. But the Swedes have that too, where it's just like, we're all kind of working together for something. And then I think that takes off some of the pressure of I have to be this or do that. But again, it's not that people can't strive to be, the best at something. It's just that's not where their like purpose or happiness or contentment really comes from.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I like that word Jantelagen, right? That's we're not. I think we're so stuck in all of that comparing ourselves, trying to up us, be better than others, and that continuous like striving to be the best is really what takes us from being content and experiencing that joy, because we will never have enough, because there's always someone who is better. I lived in Dubai for a while, and that's the best place where you could see it. There's always someone who has a better car, who has a better house, who has a better whatever, and there's never enough. So that's really interesting to see, and also the concept of one world, and that feels a little bit of like what we need a little bit more of right now with in the in our current society, not just in the US, but everywhere. It feels like the polarization is just increasing. So how do you feel like the Stoic philosophy and also Lagom could really help bring the world together?
It's funny you asked because when I was doing the school Stoic retreat, one of the administrators said, basically, like, this is a great mindset to have. Like, if everybody had this, wouldn't everybody be better off? And I was like, yes. And he's like, well, how do we get there? And I was like, well, if I had the answer, I'd probably be like a billionaire because that would be wonderful. But I think it goes back to, and this is getting very like therapy like, but I think it goes back to confidence. And if you have self confidence, because if you don't have that, you can't really self reflect on things. You can't take responsibility for things. You can't take that criticism and use it for good. You see difficulties as the obstacle and not the opportunity. So again, as children grow up and stuff, and their confidence really stems from, their primary caretakers or other, very influential people in their life. And that secure attachment is going to help them, kind of build that confidence, that ability to have that like critical eye on themselves and reflect. So really it starts from like the home and the caretakers and his kids and having that attachment. And Swedish Lagom has a lot in the book. It has a lot about like family traditions, togetherness time, and creating those family moments or just even moments with friends. It doesn't always have to be, like family, but to feel that connectedness with people and to give you that kind of sense of purpose. And that's going to help your confidence. And then as you grow up, the confident people are the ones that can say, I did make a mistake or I want to do better. If you don't have the confidence, you're not going to be able to do that. So I really think it stems from, and people you can get more confident as you get older. But I really think it comes from that ability to self-reflect and see your part in things.
That's fascinating, and that reminds me of a little video I saw by Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm not sure if you know. He's a like a American entrepreneur, and he was asked by a mom who was worried about her child going online and being influenced by people, and she was like, "How can I deal with this?" And he said, "Yeah, he has a daughter." And he's like, "He thought about this for many times." He said the exact same thing as you saying, like confidence, right? If your child or the people are confident, then they are less likely to be influenced by all those things that come at us and are more grounded. And also, as you were talking, made me think about that you also don't need to compete with others as much. You Because when you're not confident enough, it's nice to see people worse than you, right? Because you make you feel better about yourself. But if you're confident, then you can say, "Hey, let me help you," right? Let me reach out. I want you to be where I am, and I think that's and how do you think like a philosophy of life? Because we talk about stoicism a lot, but it's really about my goal really is to inspire people to have a philosophy of life and whatever that is, right? If it's stoicism, Lagom, Buddhism, whatever it is. How do you think that that can impact confidence and how people approach life?
I think can help as a kind of like an anchor, right? So it's almost okay, if I'm in a difficult situation, like what do I what philosophy or what people do I look to help kind of make this decision or help me feel, better about things? And that confidence, like we said before, can kind of come from anything. Like maybe it's athletics, and you're a runner or you do a sport and that's where you get it. Maybe it's the family time. Maybe it is, a different religion. But I think it helps kind of ground us. It also helps us realize like there's something bigger than us, whatever it is. And, with the Stoics and, living in agreement with nature, I think it kind of brings it back to that. But I think it's just finding something that helps you like feel more like yourself or helps guide you into making, good decisions in a way. And it doesn't have to be like organized religion by any means, but just, your own philosophy of how you want to live your life. What are your, values and priorities? And then how do you, want to instill that in others or just yourself? But I think it's, can be different for everybody, but really what's, yeah, what's important to you and what gives you that, purpose and direction.
That captures it perfectly, and I think that that's also what we're striving to do. And is that something that you, in your counseling, your therapy, help people to find as well? You use stoicism, but how do they find their philosophy of life, or their anchor? I love that word. How do they find their anchor, and what is your approach of helping them?
So when I started out, I worked mostly with children and adolescents, and now it's grown to, more adults. Adolescent time and teenagers are my favorite population to work with. And most people would say, oh, they're like, the most difficult. But for me, that's when they're deciding kind of who they want to be. It's funny. I was talking to my dad the other day and we were talking about stoicism and books. And I actually told him about, your podcast. And I said, I should write my other book should be about like the stoic teenager because I feel like this is the time where they need to know how to make, good choices or to, like we said, find their confidence and find something that gives them that meaning and purpose in life, something that they can attach to. So in counseling, we talk about like goals and setting and even, what makes you happy, what makes you feel alive, like where do you see yourself in a couple years, what gives you, confidence. And then we take, a little bit of that and say, okay, how do we make this, a bigger part of your life? Because for the adolescents, your brain is so malleable and you have so much like neuroplasticity that's the time where you want to try new things, be good at certain things, get your confidence that way too. And then realize like, okay, this is kind of my, philosophy of life. But I think you can start it younger, but I think the teenage years are so, impressionable, filling it with some positivity and optimism, would help them and help everybody.
But yeah, especially now that it feels like adolescents around that age, when they get more online and with social media, it feels like it's all about anger and fear and the lack of hope and positivity and optimism, right? And especially as you said, the minds are so malleable. How would you look at that when you're working with adolescents and kids? How and maybe the parents have questions, right? How do you feel about the use of social media as at that age, right? Because I believe in Australia they banned TikTok or some certain social media platforms up until like the age of 16. What are your views on that?
So yeah, in America now, in our state, there are a lot of states are banning not even just social media, but cell phones during the school day. And quite honestly, I'm very against a banning of technology. I think we have to learn how to use it in a positive way. And I think social media, again, it's not necessarily what kids do, but the why behind it. So social media can be a great, avenue for even self-esteem if it's done, correctly. If you're flooding your Instagram reels with positive things, not comparing yourself to others. But again, that's where the caregivers really come into play and seeing like, okay, how much time, is my child spending on social media and what are they looking at? So again, it's that togetherness time of like, if your child is like, oh, hey, mom or dad, like, look what I just saw, this reel. Great, you're sharing it. If they're, up in their room all day long by themselves, not connecting with anyone, I don't think that's social media's fault. I think it's an effect of how that child is feeling and other things need to be done with it. So I'm a fan of technology and social media, and I think it needs to be, we have to teach the children how to regulate themselves. I mean, if your child is, doing sports or going outside or having family time, they're not going to want to be on their phone all the time, not interact. So I think it's more of there's reasons why kids do it. And yes, they can have negative effects, but I don't think it's the social media or the phone that's causing that if everything else is, like okay.
Yeah, like the Stoics say, it's an external, right? It's a tool, and the same with AI. It's how you use it and what you do it, and it should also cultivate more of the critical thinking. That's sometimes that I feel that we're lacking. It's just like you read something online, it's like, hey, this is the truth. This is what I'm going to follow, and that should also be like the part of the parent, the caregiver, the people around. It's like, okay, what does this mean, and is this true? And really to promote that critical thinking about all the things. I wanted to add, because we talked a little bit about philosophy of life, and you write and talk about Stoicism and Lagom. How would you describe your philosophy of life with those two concepts, and maybe something else? How would you describe your philosophy of life?
I think I'm an internal optimist, and I think sometimes it might be annoying for some because they might say I'm always in a good mood or like, well, you make the best of everything. But again, that's like the misconception. Like I have other feelings. I personally really do not like the feeling of being in a bad mood. And so then I think, okay, well, if I don't want this feeling, what am I going to do about it? And I guess I don't know if it's luck or how I was raised or my brain chemistry, but I have, for me, it's easy to be able to be optimistic. And I know it's not the case for everybody because if it were, then everybody would, be in a good mood. Um, and it's okay to also be in a bad mood though, like we said, but it's just not allowing it to like you feel your emotions, you accept them, you acknowledge them, and you have to. But then you say, okay, what can I do? How do I move on from it? So for me, I think it's always finding the good in things and enjoying the little things and creating that life you want. So so the Swedes have another day, it's called Fredagsmys, and it's about a cozy Friday. So every Friday night, they get cozy, either on their couch with blankets, they play games, it's family time, and you look forward to it. And it doesn't have to be extravagant, but it's like you just find those moments throughout the day to really enjoy it. And you asked before, how I became more stoic, and I always run. But lately I've been running and I'll just look up and I know it sounds kind of strange, but I'm like, wow, it's a really pretty day. Like I never really noticed like those leaves in that way before. So I think it's really just enjoying what you're doing. It doesn't mean you probably enjoy every aspect of your life. And sometimes people would say that to me, well, you enjoy everything and you're never stressed. Well, it's because I'm choosing though, to enjoy, even if it's something I don't love. I'm trying to find the good in it because if you have to do it, right? I always tell clients, you can either do it and be miserable or you can do it and find some joy out of it. So I think it's the little things in life and just really enjoying things. People say, you don't do anything that you don't want to do. And that's probably right because I try to find a good in everything that I do just to make it more, enjoyable.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds it resonates quite with me because I feel kind of similar. And it feels like, when you mentioned about the running, and I see your posts on Instagram, if any of the listeners isn't following you, please do. And I'll put all the links and everything in the description. But it feels like there's more like awareness and gratitude, right? About like seeing what's around you instead of being that, focused on just, the things right, but just looking around and being more optimistic about the wonders of that. Is that something that you can identify with, like the awareness and gratitude? Has that also come from Stoicism, or is that something that was more ingrained in yourself?
I think it's both. Definitely more aware of, the gratitude and how that's such a big part of Stoicism. One of my favorite quotes and was hanging in my office was, every day may not be good, but there's something good in every day. And I would have my clients say, okay, answer that question for me. Because it's, it might not be that all of your day is bad, but people will say, like, oh, I had the worst day. And it's like, but then you're not telling your brain true things, and you're going to, it's overwhelming. You're going to start thinking, like, oh my God, my whole day was bad. But if you kind of pick out those little things and be grateful, for what you have or what you did, there is, I don't know who said it, but if the way you talk to yourself, right, instead of saying like, I have to get up today, I have to go for a run, I have to go to work. If you say, I'm able to get up, I get to go for a run, then it just really changes that whole mindset and your attitude towards it. So I think, yeah, it's the gratitude is a huge part of finding that joy in every day.
Ah, I love that quote. That's just one I'm gonna remember as well. I'm gonna look up to. That not every day is good, but there's good in every day. I like that. Because there is good, and sometimes people's like, "Oh, Benny, how can you be? You're always such an optimist." And when I was in the schools in Dubai, my fellow teachers, they were like, frowning and looking frustrated and everything, and I could see kind of the joy and sometimes the silliness of everything around. So I definitely relate in that. And staying with the book of Lagom, which is really interesting, I wanted to ask, like, how was it the writing process of writing with your mom? Like, because that sounds like when you're writing, it sounds like you're really diving into something deep. And how did that influence you? And what did you learn there? I'm just curious, how did that experience impact you?
It was a great experience. And we kind of wrote it because it was, what I would be telling clients, like how to, have overall better well being. It was kind of the Swedish way of life. And when we researched things a little bit more, like there are certain things my mom didn't even realize it was a Swedish thing to do because it was just so, ingrained in her, like little things like taking off your shoes, having always fresh flowers in the house, never taking the last piece of food. So like our family gatherings, there's always one piece left. And now it's like a joke because it's like, okay, somebody be not Swedish and just take the last piece of food. But it was a fun experience. And we really, at the end of the book, we talk about how it was like Lagom writing because we did it, together. And we found that balance of, her views of it was very different from her mom being an immigrant from Sweden, not having all of those Swedish traditions because you wanted to be more American. And then me growing up, my mom really instilled a lot of the Swedish, values and holidays in us because she didn't always have it, growing up. So it was a good, different perspectives of it. But the important thing in that book too, and with Stoicism too, you don't have to be Swedish. You don't have to say you're, a Stoic or an expert in Stoic philosophy. Anybody can use these skills, no matter what your background is, no matter where you live or how you live. And anything you take from it, it's going to, better your life, even if it's just like one little thing. Like when I have a client that like quotes a Stoic saying to me or quote, it makes my day because I'm like, oh, see if they just they just latched onto that little piece, but it's making a difference. So again, it's just that those little things, in life that's really going to have a big impact.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful to hear, right? About even like how your mom's view of these traditions, your grandma's view, and you, and that it really got instilled, especially if you're in a country, that isn't, where you were raised. It's nice to have those traditions, and it's nice to keep them, right, from your grandma, right, but also from your mom to kind of instill those a little bit more. I think that's wonderful. And as you bring up the quotes, I wanted to shift towards the Stoicism book of the quotes and the Marcus Aurelius books of quotes, like, because I do think a lot of people, they kind of criticize the quotes. It's like, oh, people only know the quotes, but they can make an impact, right? Just because they're like mantras. And what was your view, and with your co-writer, like what was the idea behind writing those books? And there might be many more to come, right, as you mentioned.
Right. I think it was how to make it accessible for everybody. And so it's not like picking up meditations where it's kind of more difficult, to read, where these are like small digestible chapters of it's broken up into like mindset, empathy, death, dealing with others, nature, things like that. And then it has the quotes after it. So it kind of talks about how you can use the Stoic mindset in those aspects of your life, and then quotes that kind of go along with it. And just, kind of shorter quotes. The Marcus Aurelius Book of Quotes is a bit longer with all of his quotes, but it's still set up the same way. And at the end of each chapter in that book, we have a challenge for the readers. Maybe it's like a gratitude journal or self-reflection, but something really like tangible that they can do to kind of live those, daily Stoic practices. But it's really so everybody could use it. It doesn't mean that you have to be like a philosophy major, but it was just how you could kind of incorporate little daily Stoic things into your life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I have a Kindle, I like to travel much. I love to have like paperback books or hard copy books, like real books. But since I travel, the Kindle is just a little bit easier, so I don't have to carry it back with just books around. And the interesting there is that you can see what people highlight the most. And some of the quotes you can see like, oh, this has been highlighted by, there's like a little squiggly line underneath. It's like, oh, this quote has been highlighted most. And that's where you can see what resonates with people. And it's also nice to see like those quotes, they really have an impact. And I liked how you put them into topics, right? As you mentioned, the topics about mindset, death. One was about toxic as well, if I remember correctly. And how did you, because that's something that, when I have quotes on my website as well, and sometimes it's difficult to put them into like a specific bracket, if you will. Like how did you work around that, and was that difficult?
Yeah, and I think some of them can be, kind of incorporated to every, topic
Yeah.
and aspect, but I think we just did what would be easiest for people to kind of really relate to. So it was like, okay, if you're dealing with, I think one of the chapters is like dealing with people. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go to that chapter to look at this quote, and that can be kind of like my personal mantra, right, to repeat to myself on how I can deal, with those difficult people. So I think we tried to find the most like useful ones to put in those topics. But there's so many, and it's funny because I'll, when I do like posts and stuff, I'll look for new quotes, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even like I hadn't heard that one before, and I get excited because I'm like, oh, I thought I knew all of them, but there's so many of them.
Yeah, there's so many of them, and just dealing with people, that always reminds me of that quote that really showed me the practicality of Stoicism. It's from Marcus Aurelius. He says, that person is bound to act that way. It's like getting angry at a fig tree, and soon you'll be dead, and soon forgotten. And that showed me really the practicality of it, and the impact of one quote. I was able to implement that right the next day. And you mentioned in the Marcus Aurelius book of Stoic quotes, you have the practical exercises at the end, because it is important to really practice it. And how do you hope to help people really practice and implement this philosophy more with the Stoic quote books that you have?
I think to start, if you're creating any kind of new behavior that you want to be a habit, you have to really put the time into it. So it might be like, okay, I'm going to read more Stoic quotes every night. I'm going to try to do a gratitude journal. I'm going to do some self reflection. And then hopefully those become just your normal way of living, where it's, you're not even like thinking about it anymore. And it's always good to kind of reference back the quotes. I had one colleague came up and said, I have your book and it's all highlighted and I have notes and everything, and I'll look back to it, kind of what you're saying with the Kindle. And I think it's good to do that sometimes, to kind of have a refresher and read it again, because every time you read it, you're in a different place, you have a different perspective, and you can probably get something new from it. But I think at first, do those daily behaviors until they become a habit, and then it'll kind of just be ingrained into your, everyday mindset and living. But also important to continue to self-reflect and go back and see where, we can improve.
Yeah, and they're like a small enchiridion, right? The Handbook of Epictetus. That's kind of how it feels like with the quotes. It's like, oh, I'm struggling with my mindset. Let me just go to this part of the book, and let me just read a couple of quotes, and kind of get back into the to that. Use that as your anchor, right? I like that how you said that. And is that also how you kind of use your background in CBT with the Epictetus talks a lot about habits, right? And they really need that practice, that continuous effort that you do. Is that something that you really want to hone into as well with these books and the things that you have planned?
So with CBT too, it's very, at least I'm very, kind of like solution focused, but very like skills based.
Hmm.
And sometimes clients will say, I'm doing it, but it's not working. And I think, okay, well, are you really doing it? Are you putting in that time? It's like with physical activity or working out. It's like you have to put in the time to see the results. And it's the same, with your mindset. So I think with having that stoic mindset and using different therapy tools, it's like, okay, every day I want you to practice this, or I want you to even like read this quote and see how it could apply, to your life. But I think you have to make it a priority at first and put in the time if you want to get something, you know, it.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating for some people because you don't see the results instantly, right? It can take. I remember, from a different side with my knee injury that I had, my physical therapist would ask like, "Oh, did you do your exercises?" And I was like, I can lie here, but no, I didn't really. And then after a while, she was like, "So, are you surprised that you're not making the progress that you should be making?" It's like, okay, you're right. Let me just I need to put in some more work. But those first steps, you don't really see the benefits when they just kind of, incrementally in a step based kind of, then you can see them. How do you kind of, is that difficult to work with the clients who aren't really that motivated? And can you use the philosophy as well to keep them motivated and on track?
Yeah, and I think it's easier, right, if you have a very motivated client, but that's not usually always the case, and rightfully so. But I think, I always say the word like, progress, not perfection.
Hmm.
And now I can't remember who said it, but who said celebrate the small victories? I use that quote a lot too, because that's what we have to be reminded of, that it's not going to happen overnight, but just by doing a little bit, like that is the victory. And we're going to, we just want to make progress. It doesn't have to be perfect. And, to empathize with them then too, and realize, it's much easier said than done, and it's going to take time. But again, see the joy in like the process, and see the joy in like the suffering sometimes. And it's very hard to do, but take something from it, and think like you're saying with your injury. So I couldn't run for a couple months because I had plantar fasciitis. So instead of getting really upset, which I wanted to do, I was like, okay, I'll take this time to work on something else, or I'll do, to try and make the best of it. It doesn't mean I wasn't frustrated, but what can you do? So it's kind of refocusing too, like our energy and our thoughts. And it's that different like cognitive reprising of things, where it's okay, how am I going to view this differently to get something good out of it? Not in a selfish way, but just, to make myself feel a little bit better about things.
Yeah, and that's that optimistic view, is right. It was like, okay, instead of focusing on what I can't do, is like, what can I do, right? The same with your injury and what my injury and other things that we do, that we face in life. Okay, this is not an option. Let me see what I can do and how can I make the best of it. And I really like that. And I'm definitely gonna have to learn some more Swedish, because the words that you've sprinkled through the conversation here, they really like. What was the word for the Friday again? The for Dagsamheit, or
Dogs
for Dagsmis. Yeah, it has a little bit of Dutch connotation there. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
some of the things I can relate. And as we start to wrap this up, I wanted to first hear a little bit more about like what's more in the pipeline. What do you have to offer? And afterwards, we can see where our listeners can find you. But what else is there behind these, besides these books that you've already written?
So we have two more quote books. The next one to come out is the Stoicism book of Body and Mind.
Okay.
And then we have a Stoic Wealth. So it's going to be the same format where we have the quotes and then different chapter titles and how to apply those to your everyday life. So the next one, yes, is more about kind of overall well-being, mind and body. And that should be out probably in the next like 6 months or so. And then the wealth one will be a little bit after that.
That's amazing, and they can be bought like anywhere, like on Kindle, Amazon, and everywhere, right? Because of
Yeah, anywhere books are sold. Yep.
yeah, nice. And just to wrap it up, where can people? I saw your websites already; they're wonderful and they're really lovely to see. So, but where can people find you and follow you for the quotes? Because you do give like really nice, inspirational daily videos and quotes. So, definitely recommend people to follow you.
So on Instagram, it's the Morning Stoic, and like you said, it's every day, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's a new post. Also on Instagram, Swedish Lagom, and then the same. You can find me on LinkedIn, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, but Instagram, I would do the Morning Stoic.
Okay, that's amazing. And I will put all the links down in the description for people to find and everything. And there's going to be something on the website as well, so people can go there and link back to it and find you. But I definitely, it's really nice to kind of watch the stories in your feed. It's really uplifting, and it's nice. I love reading Stoic quotes, nice reminders. So thank you for all that you do, and and thank you for your time. It was such a wonderful conversation, and maybe we'll have it in the future again and talk a little. Maybe have a Swedish lesson on more of those concepts, because that was really fascinating, and definitely on Stoicism. So thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I love your podcast. You're doing great work, and you have a lot of great tips and discussions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.